happened here? Better. So here's the NPC scenario. I mean, there's nothing new here, except maybe to remind me to tell you that that's what my players look like in general on these slides. And I'll be talking about multi-party protocols rather than just two-party protocols, as has been done most of the time before. There's a communication network. This is going to be a synchronous network all the time. And as usual, we have some inputs and some desired outputs that we're going to compute. And as an adversary, he looks like this on my slides. He can corrupt people. This can be done semi-honestly, passively, where you just observe what's going on inside the corrupted players. It can also be active. You take full control. So something like this happens. And then I assume static corruption throughout. So the adversary must choose who is corrupt initially. And that's basically the scenario throughout. The goal, as you know, of course, of MPC is that we want that there's a trusted party. The protocol acts as if there was a trusted party to whom we could just send the inputs, and he'll send us back the outputs. So there's a guy in the middle there who will just be receiving inputs, correctly computing the output by definition, and sending that back to the players. The technical statement that the protocol acts as if we had as if we had Snoopy around can be formalized in the UC framework. I won't talk much about just now what that means exactly, but I'll get back to this in a little bit more detail when we get to the proofs of these protocols. But just to tell you that when I say we prove something, what I mean is that we do it in a UC framework. Okay, so yes. So what do we know about information theory and NPC? Well, if you take a step back and look at a high enough level, they all say the same thing, the results that we know. They say, as long as there's not too much corruption around, then we can compute any function securely. And if there's too much, there are some functions we cannot have. One particular example of this is the well-known result. This goes back to Rabin and Benor back in '88. If we have secure point-to-point channels plus broadcast. So secure point-to-point means information theoretically secure point-to-point. When two honest players talk to each other, the adversary cannot see anything, information at all about what's being said. Okay? And we have honest majority, then we can get unconditional security for any function, and we can even do it pretty efficiently. I mean, since Rabin and Benor, there's been tons of papers that improve the efficiency of this quite substantially. So on the other hand, what about dishonest majority then? That's this trust only yourself scenario that Claudia was talking about yesterday. So it's known here that we cannot get unconditional security if we start from scratch. But of course, we can do computational secure protocols, and there's also a very large body of research on this. Of course, we cannot guarantee termination because, if I say there's only two players, one guy just stops playing, what can I do? I mean, I cannot finish the protocol. So this might lead you to ask, so all these nice efficient solutions that we have for unconditional security, will they be completely useless in case of dishonest majority? So you heard Claudia's talk yesterday. You know the answer is no, of course. There are also other reasons why the answer is no. For instance, there's the famous MPC in the head paradigm, which is basically this general construction template that allows you to take a multi-party protocol and construct a two-party protocol that is also secure if the multi-party protocol was secure. And that can be used to improve efficiency, and it's very nice. I'll talk about something else, then the pre-processing model, and there's a whole bunch of papers that sort of form the background of this. I'll be talking about the three bottom papers here, so the so-called Speeds 1 and Speeds 2 paper, and also later on this Minimac thing. This is probably a good time to say that the protocol I will be telling you about is actually not a protocol you will find exactly in either of the two Speeds papers. That is simply because, first of all, I took what I thought was the best points from either of the protocols and the ones that were easiest to explain, and put together something that I think makes more sense in a talk like this. I apologize for the fact that you can't go to any of the papers and read exactly this protocol, but if you look at both papers, I think it's pretty clear what's going on. The consolation I have is that there is currently a journal paper being written about speeds, and that will reflect much more closely what I'm talking about here. Okay, so reminder, Claudia told you yesterday, so MPC with pre-processing means there's a pre-processing phase. We can do this anytime before we actually have to compute. And at this time, we don't have to know what inputs we have. We might not even know which function we will be computing later. So we just create raw material. We fill up the gas tank, so to speak. And then in the online phase, we consume what we have in the tank. And then we know the inputs, we know the function to compute. And we can do it much more efficiently, hopefully because we have this raw material from the preprocessing. And of course, the goal is to use just cheap information generating tools here and push all the expensive public key stuff into the preprocessing. So in the following, this is just terminology. When I talk about the trusted dealer who gives us this and gives us that, that means the preprocessing does this. Then later on, we have to implement this guy in the form of a protocol. Okay? So this is a reminder once again, but I have maybe some points to add on the way. Claudio showed you the same thing yesterday. Okay? So we have a secret value x. It's going to be represented by additive shares. So Charlie knows x1, Lucy knows x2, and they add together to x. Those we call the shares. We could think of x1 and x2 being supplied by the dealer. Then of course neither player has information on x initially, but you can open x by exchanging the shares. That reminds me to say, I'll be using the field with p elements here all the time, but of course everything works just fine for any finite field that you like. I'll consider 2 players, just to make some of the drawings, but everything is going to work for 2 players as well. And in fact, a lot of the points here will be about trying to make things scale better as a number of players will increase. So here's notation. So x in brackets, x in a box, means this set of shares. So it's a way to write down x in a distributed fashion, right? I mean, I store x1 with Charlie, I store x1 with Lucy. This is a representation of x. And you know, it's really no different from writing down x in a computer. I mean, we need some way to represent numbers, right? And then once we have a representation, we want to compute them on those representations. So let's say I have 2 of these guys, x in the box, y in the box, and then I can add boxes together. And the way I do this in this simple case is of course obvious. I just have Charlie add his shares, Lucy adds her shares, and then we get a box obviously of the same format which contains x plus y. And the same works for multiplication by public constants. So the idea is that I mean the only special thing about this representation is it's distributed across several machines, and it's designed in a way that the adversary doesn't know the value we're writing down. Otherwise, it's just write down numbers and compute them. We can now compute any linear function on shared values. If we want to multiply, of course, we do Beaver. This is the same thing Claudio told you. So we assume given x in the box, y in the box, we're going to compute a representation of x times y. So the sort of dealer gives to the players a, b, and c in boxes. A and b are random, c is a times b. What you do is you open the difference between x and a, and y and b, and then you do this linear combination of c in a box, b in a box, a in a box with those coefficients, and this gives you x times y in the box. And the way you see this is simply by plugging in what is e, what is d, and do the math on the right side. And there's really no need to fiddle with the explicit shares here to prove this, right? Because I mean, as long as you know that taking linear combination of boxes results in the corresponding linear combination of the content, then it follows directly from this equation I'm writing down here. Okay. Good. So, also a trusted dealer can help us make representations of a particular input value that a player might want to enter into the computation. One way to do it is, let's say the dealer supplies a random value in the box and gives R also to player A. Then A will adjust his share of R by adding A minus R to it. And this means we now have a box that contains A, right? Because now the shares add together to A instead of R. For the simple passive case, there's even simpler ways to do it. But I want to make a point here that these are 2 examples of a design pattern in protocols you see all the time. If I want an object of a certain type containing some data during my protocol, and I don't want to spend the time on computing it from scratch just now, what I do is I make a random object of the same type containing random data. And then when the time comes, I adjust this thing into containing the data I want it to contain. Right? B-REST is just like this. You want a multiplication? Okay, give me a random multiplication. I'll adjust it into the values I want. And this particular trick is the same thing. You'll see it coming up lots of other times. And this is something that makes sense also, not even just in the pre-processing model, but also if you want to parallelize things, right? Because generating lots of random objects can be done in parallel easily, And in this way, I might be able to parallelize, if not all my computation, then at least a substantial part of it. So it's worthwhile to remember this type of trick, because when you design a protocol, you might want to use the same sort of trick. Okay, so if you put all this together, then let's say we have a circuit with some input values that are held by the players. What we do is that we create these objects, things in boxes. Of course, they would usually be opaque. You can't see what's inside, but just for pedagogical purposes, I let you peek a little bit. Right? And then we go through the circuit and create new objects according to the gates we see. We sum. We can multiply this with consumer multiplication triple, another multiplication, and then finally we open the output. We open the box containing the output. And this is secure and sort of on the very high intuitive level. The reason this is secure is because we only open the output box, so therefore only the output gets released. So the conclusion is we can do general passively secure multi-party computation if there is this pre-processing that gives you these multiplication triples. Does anybody want to make a remark about my values here? I mean, sometimes when I do this, people ask me, why do you put 10 as the output? Why not 54? You see, I'm computing module 11 here, so it should be 10. But, yeah, well, you missed the opportunity. Okay, anyway, that's for the passive case. What happens if players don't follow the protocol? Well, all sorts of bad things, right? Because players lie about this. Yes, and we compute the wrong function, and data might leak. So the solution you've seen yesterday, and in fact goes all the way back to Rabin and Benor, and was then taken up again in various papers for the pre-processing model later on. And the idea is you authenticate shares. So Charlie's share comes with the message authentication code. The other guy usually has the corresponding key, and when Charlie reveals his share, he has to produce a MAC as well, and Lucy will check this MAC until I successfully you prove that Charlie has to guess the key to do this. Okay. This doesn't scale very well with the number of players though, because each player has to store order and field elements where there's a number of players. And the reason for this, of course, is that in this model, everybody except one can be corrupt. I can be the only honest guy in the world. So therefore, of course, I cannot have the same key as this other guy, because he might be corrupt, and now the adversary knows the key and can cheat me. Right? So everybody needs to have their own key. And therefore, correspondingly, I also have to have a MAC on my share that every other player can check if you do it this way. So that leads to the whole thing being quadratic if you add up everything. So the first idea in the speech protocol is to get around this by authenticating the secret value itself instead of the shares. I'll get back in detail to what this exactly means, but first let me get to the MAC that we'll use, because that's a little bit different from what Claudio showed you. It's even simpler, in fact, in a sense. So there will be a message, X, there will be a key alpha, which is randomly chosen in my field, and then MAC will simply be the product of the key and the message. It's as simple as that. It's going to be called M of X in the following. And the security this thing has is defined by the following game. So let's say that the adversary gets to see the message, but not the key nor the MAC. Now it uses an error contribution E to modify X, and an error contribution E prime that will be used to modify the MAC. After this, we check the MAC as you would normally do. Right? So what we do is, well, if the MAC is supposed to be the product of the key and the message, what we do is that we take alpha, the key, multiply by the purported message, which is X plus E, and then we check, is that this plus E prime, is that equal to the MAC that we know is the correct MAC? Now, E prime is on the other side. That's just for convenience, actually. I mean, the point is that E prime can be thought of as something that modifies the MAC. If you move it to the other side, you'll see, it's MAC minus E prime. Is that really equal to alpha times modified message? The adversary wins if the check goes through, and if he is not zero, he actually successfully modified the message to something else, right? Okay, is this going to be secure? Well, so if the check goes through, we have that the MAC is equal to alpha times X, that's by definition, and the check says it is good enough, so that must be equal to alpha times X plus E prime. Now, if you look at the equation there, then you have an alpha X here, that cancels out, and as a result you have that what we're really checking is that alpha E plus E prime is 0. Okay? If E is not 0, this determines alpha, right? But recall that E and E prime by definition of the game are chosen independently of alpha. So therefore this happens, of course, only with probability 1 over P, because that's the size of the field. Okay? Happy with this so far? Good. So this is just an abstract game, right? I mean, I'm going to have to prove later on that what goes on in the protocol when the adversary tries to cheat him actually is equivalent to this game. But that's for later on. Okay. So there's also a nice homomorphic property here, of course. It's obvious that the sum of two max is a mac on the sum of the messages, which will be very useful later on. Okay? Good. So now we, yes?
You look on the same key or?
Yes. Yes, so the question was, do I mean on the same key? Yes. In the protocol alpha, the key will be kept constant throughout the protocol. There will only be one key alpha.
For all the...
For everything, yes. And therefore, of course, if you add 2 max, alpha goes outside the parentheses and you get the sum inside, right? This might seem, ooh, this is dangerous, right? But it's not, it's fine. Stay with it. Okay, so here's the representation. So we have a secret value again, which is additively secret shared, x1 plus x2. Those will be called the data shares. We also have this mac m of x, which is alpha times x. This will now also be additively secret shared into mx1 and then x2. And then we will also, once and for all, the dealer will issue shares alpha 1, alpha 2 to players such that alpha is also alpha 1 times alpha 2. Okay? So the representation of x is this now. There will be data shares x1 and x2. There will be max shares mx1 and mx2. In addition, you always have these key shares, which sit around all the time. So one player can be malicious now. So if you try to open this value, well, of course you should exchange the data shares, but you don't know whether they're correct. So we should somehow check that the value we get when we add the shares is correct. And of course, intuitively, you have to use the key somehow to do this. But it's also pretty obvious that, of course, we can't reveal the key because then the adversary knows it and can cheat all the other max very easily. So there is a way to handle this, but I'll postpone this for a while. But I promise I will tell you how this is done. It's a little bit better to explain first how you compute on these things. So now x in the box means something else. Right? It now means both data shares and max shares. If I had 2 of these boxes, well, it's just the same as before, isn't it? I mean, of course, I can add these 2 things by just adding component-wise. And alpha goes outside the parentheses, as we talked about before. So therefore, of course, if I add the boxes, I get x plus y. And this is also from multiplication by public constants. That's also quite trivial. Addition, curiously, by constant is not quite so trivial. So what I define d plus public constant d plus x in the box to be is what is down there. So the first player adds the d to his share, and the other data share is left unchanged, which means, of course, that the sum correctly is x plus d. That's fine. Okay, and then the max shares. Well, each player does the same thing. You take your max share of x, then you take the public constant and multiply this by your share of alpha and add this into the max share. Other player does the same thing. Now you can see if you add together the max shares, what you get is the sum of the original max shares, which is alpha x. You also get this d alpha 1 plus d alpha 2. That's d times alpha, right? Now you put alpha outside the whole thing, and you got alpha times x plus d. Right? Are you happy with this? So therefore, this is now a box of the same form as before, and now it contains x plus d. Right? So the key shares are really useful here, also for computation. Okay. So here is, yes, okay, so to enter input, x held by Charlie, well, same trick as before, assume that the dealer supplies a random thing in a box called R and has given R itself to Charlie in the beginning. He's now going to broadcast x minus R, and the players will compute this thing plus the random box, and this will give a box containing x by what I told you just now in the previous slide. Okay? This is supposedly secure, right? Because R is random, known by no one at this point. So seeing x minus R is just like seeing a one-time pad encryption of x. So that's perfectly fine. Multiplication is trivial given what you know. Just do beaver, and the proof is the same as before. So I don't have to repeat this, right? I mean, you saw the proof on the earlier slide with the boxes. As long as the boxes are linear, same proof applies. Okay, so that's fine. Now we just need this opening thing. Okay, so remember, we have data shares, we have max shares, and we have key shares. And the alpha shares are constant all over the place, right? So now what we do is that players exchange the data shares and add up. Of course, a corrupt player might lie now and he has an error to his share, so what we really get is x prime, which is x plus some error e, okay? Now players compute locally the following thing. So the first guy, he says, D1, I will define as being alpha, the key share, times x prime, this message that may or may not be equal to x. And I'll subtract my max share. The other guy does the same thing. Now you should observe, if you add D1 and D2 together, what you will get is alpha times x prime. That's from the first two items in D1 and D2. And then you will get minus mx, the original mac. Right? This is just by definition of the max shares. Okay? So of course what we want to check is this 0? Because that's the max share, isn't it? We want to see, is alpha times the would-be message equal to the mac? Because then we should be happy. Okay, so we have D1, D2. They should add up to 0. So what do we do? Well, here's a suggestion. So player 1 sends D1 to player 2. Player 2 sends D2 to player 1. We add up. We see if it's 0. Are you happy? No. Why are you not happy? Yeah, player 2 can cheat. So of course, I mean, if player 2 is corrupt and sees D1, of course he will adjust D2 to make the sum be 0, and everything seems fine, even though it's not. So this does not work. But what we can do is we have to commit, right? So you heard about commitment schemes before in the school. So assume for now just ideal commitment functionality. So it's possible to put D1 in a safe, place it on the table, and player 2 does the same thing. And then after this has happened, then we open up, and then we. And now it's fine. Because then we know that yes?
So you want to open values not just at the end, because at the end we could just, in theory, just reveal alpha, we wouldn't care. The whole point here is you want to do without revealing alpha?
Yes. So the whole idea, this is one of the contributions to speech 2 and speech 1, we had a version where alpha would be revealed at the end. But this is bad because then if you have raw material left that you didn't use it, you couldn't use it again. And in speech 2, there's this trick here which allows you to not have to do this. Okay, so this works, I claim. Why? Well, so consider, a dishonest player might of course commit to a wrong value. So what we're really checking here is the D1 plus D2 plus some error contribution E prime, decided by the adversary, is 0. If you plug in what those things are, you get this expression, and you end up on this side here with alpha times x plus e minus mx plus e prime. Or equivalently, if you read all the way, on one side you have 0, on the other side you have this expression, you can move mx to the other side, and the equation you have is mx equals alpha x plus e prime. That's exactly the equation I had in my game before. And what we proved there was that if e is not 0, this equation is going to be satisfied in probability 1 over p. Assuming, of course, that the adversary has seen x, but neither alpha nor the mac. But he hasn't, right? Because at the time when he had to commit to his value, he hasn't seen anything yet. So this thing has this property. If things are okay, and of course, note the adversary knows in advance if it's going to be okay, because if his errors are 0, then he knows it's going to be okay. If he had errors, it's not going to be okay, except with very small probability. So at this point, if things are good, this will be 0. Well, we know it was 0. Learn nothing new. If it's wrong, we abort, everything is over. Okay? So this has error probability 1 divided by field size. So for now, I'm just going to assume that the field is big enough so that 1 over field size is an acceptable error probability. We can talk about this on what we do if that's not the case. Okay? Yes?
You open here the actual feature based on input. So why are you saying that this is an error as 5 minutes before? Maybe the error propagates information about private input.
Oh, the point is that okay. So this, I think the best answer is wait a while and you'll see. in 2 slides, I think. Okay. So the question was what happens if there's, okay, let's talk about this later. So this leads to a first somewhat naive proposal for an online protocol. Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. So I mean, of course, what about these commitments? Where do they come from? So for that, I have to define a different kind of representation of values that's more reliable in a way, if you will. So here's an extended representation. So now there's going to be data shares just like before. But now there's going to be, if there are 2 players, it's going to be 2 Macs. In general, it's going to be 1 Mac for each player. Okay, so there will be an M1 of X, which is a Mac with key beta 1. That's being additive in secret chat among the 2 players. There's a Mac M2 of X for the second player with key beta 2. That's also additive in shared among the players. And the deal will issue keys beta 1, beta 2 to the players, and also the Mac shares, of course. And now you can easily see, just by the same Mac security as before, that if, and by the way, I'll call this X in double brackets here. So this can be opened reliably, of course, because you just send your shares of X and of the Mac that the other player can check, right? So then by the same proof as before, then Charlie will know if that was the correct value, and so will Lucy if she's honest. So this is fine. I mean, then now I don't need commitments to have this be checked securely, but of course it requires much more data, because this guy is actually, basically going to lead to quadratic stories in a number of players. So I shouldn't be using too many of those, right? But they can be done this way. Yes. So.
Why do you want to get rid of commitments?
Well, I don't want to get rid of commitments. I mean, the point is, I can use this extended representation to implement commitments if I have pre-processing. But if I want to avoid random oracles. So let me get to this. So if I want to do a commitment that's information theoretically and secure and no oracles around, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the deal supply one of these double bracket R's and R in clear text to the committer P. And now to commit to a value, just broadcast X minus your committed value X minus that random thing. This doesn't mean anything, of course. And to open, we just open the R. Now everybody can compute what this value was. So if this is of course perfectly hiding and perfectly binding. But the point is that this is going to require quadratic storage of data values per commitment. So it's much more expensive than the other representation. But if I can minimize the use of commitments, that's not actually so bad. Now, of course, if I don't mind using random oracles, of course I can do that instead. I mean, just concatenate the committed value by some randomness, put it into the oracle, and reveal the output, and we're done, right? But I'm just telling you that there is a way to not have to use random oracles here as well. Okay. Okay. So here's the online protocol, first version. Yes.
You need extractability from these commitments. If I hash, using plagiarism and hashing to take the standard assumption in some sort of random properties in the hash function, but it's also resistant unless you need extractability.
I think I do that. I think I do need this.
You need extractability,
Yeah.
that's right.
So the question was, do I need extractability? I think I do need that for the proof.
So you're claiming it's going to be UC eventually, right?
Yes.
So then,
Yes. Or at least, okay, let me put it this way. The proof gets much easier if this is a UC commitment. But anyway. So here's the first stab at the online protocol. It's kind of what you think about pretty obviously. So we establish representations X for each input value X. And now we just go through an arithmetic circuit over the field, gate by gate. We do addition of constant, multiply by constant, multiply protocol according to the type of gate we encounter. And we end up with boxes that contains the outputs, and we just open those. Okay. This is fine, this is going to be secure. But the efficiency is pretty bad, because each multiplication consumes a multiplication triple. And consuming such a triple requires you open 2 values. I just told you that for 2 players, we have to do 2 commitments from each player every time. This is going to be way too expensive. So my goal is to be linear in the circuit size overall, and and for instance not have circuit size times n squared or something like And this certainly doesn't meet that goal. Okay, so what do we do about this? So here's the online protocol second version. What we do is that instead of checking max individually for all the open values, we do something that seems insecure, but we just do a partial opening.
Sorry, I didn't follow the last comment on the previous slide.
Yeah?
You have to open 2 per multiplication table, so why isn't it still linear?
So what I'm saying is that, so the question was, if I open 2 values per multiplication triple, why isn't that linear work? Well, it's not, because to open securely, I have to do 2 commitments, if there are 2 players, for each value I open. Now, if I do the commitments I just showed you, that's going to require quadratic storage for each of those commitments. So therefore, if I do this, I'm going to get, total data storage and work something like circuit size times n squared, which is not what I want. And by the way, even if I did random oracle or hashing or whatever, I'm still going to get security parameter times. That was not nice. So yeah, here's the second version. So we're going to do something seems weaker. Every time we open something, we do partial opening. So we will exchange only the data value shares. No MAC changes now. Okay. So here's the protocol. We do a presentation of the inputs. That's the same thing as before. We go through the arithmetic circuit gate by gate, just like before, but every time we have to open something for the multiplication, we just do a partial opening. That's certainly not too expensive. And we end with some representations that might contain the outputs. And then, of course, again, they might not, right? Because all those partial openings might be totally wrong. We might be computing on totally the wrong values. So the representations, the boxes we have at the end, they might contain the correct output, but they might not. But we can check if they do. If we check all the max of all the values that we open partially. So the point here is that you can do a batch check on all these max at once, which is going to be much more efficient than doing individual max checks. So this is what we do now. And if that check is okay, then we believe that we do have the right output inside the output boxes, and then we open those in a normal way. Yes? Is the plan clear? So this should work, right? If indeed I can do this batch max check, I'm promising you. Yeah? Okay, so this, I think this maybe partially answers Yehuda's question from before, that he was saying, what about errors that propagate? Well, of course they propagate, but I'm not going to propagate them longer than to a point where I haven't realized anything yet. So if I can catch it before that time, it should be fine. Okay, so here's the situation. We have, things, boxes we opened. x0, x1 up to xt for some very large value of t probably. And we have open values x prime 0 up to x prime t, which might or might not be equal to the original axis. And we want to check whether that's the case or not. Okay? Good. So, we do something. I mean, it's people who have been into protocol theory or even complexity of proof system theory will recognize this. If you want to batch check a large number of things, what do? You take a linear combination, random linear combination, and check the output. So the idea is, let's say we could choose E1 up to ET at random in the field and compute, for one thing, this Y in a box, which is a linear combination of the boxes containing x0 up to xt, with the EIs and coefficients. This will result in this Y, and that will be equal to E0 times x0 plus, etc. up to ET We also compute the same linear combination of the x primes in clear, right? And what you can now prove very easily is if for any I it is the case that x prime I is not xi, then y is prime is going to be equal to y with probability at most 1 over p. This is very simple to show. Do you believe me? Yeah, there are more or less fancy ways of doing this, but it's a pretty easy proof. Okay, so that means that if we can check reliably that y equals y prime, then we should be fine. Right? Okay, so we do this just with opening protocol. We're simply going to open y, or rather, we will check that y is equal to y prime with exactly the same opening check as we did before for a single commit. So each player will compute locally a value di is going to be a share of his mac in y minus y prime times the share of alpha, commit to this thing, open later, and the sum has to be 0. Remember, and I should have written this down implicitly perhaps, that of course this max share here is something you know as a player, because you've computed this linear combination here. This also means you compute max shares right here. That's part of taking the combination of the boxes. Okay? Yes?
Actually, I need to response for the entire, all of the values, not for every output. You just match all of the max and I set in a single logic.
I can, so what the current plan is to check everything that I did during the computation phase before I open the output. I mean, I cannot do one check over the whole thing because it's not secure to open the output values before I know that I did the right thing during the computation phase, right? But of course, if there are many output values, I can batch check those too. That's certainly possible.
Why do you need any partial opening for this?
Why do I need partial opening?
You said you're going to do partial opening, you're going to do the multiplication gates,
Yes.
and then you're going to do this batch check.
Yeah.
So where do you use the partial opening here?
Because I do need to have a candidate for the values. Because if you remember, what do we, so the question was, why do I need the partial opening here? It's because when you do the multiplication, you open a difference between a random value and an actual data value. That difference is used in the following computation immediately. So I need some candidate value at least, which might be wrong, but if everything is fine, it's the right value, and I need that to compute the next box that comes out of the multiplication game. Yes?
And what if they don't honestly use the same linear combination the proof would still?
Would the, well, so would the proof still work if not everybody uses the same? Well, but so what I'm referring to here is what the honors players will be doing. Now, obviously, so, and of course, what is at least certainly the case is that the honors players will agree on this value by prime, because that's only in public values. What happens inside the box? Well, it's well defined for the honest players. It's not well defined for the bad guys, but the game for the max anyway allows them to do whatever they want. So I don't really care what they do. Yes.
So the point here is that you don't need to use the commitments that you used before. That's
So the point of doing it this way is that this method here consumes a linear number of commitments. So as many commitments I have players to do this last check that y prime equals y. That's the only thing it does. Now the number of commitments is independent of the size of the circuit. And that's the point. Okay. And this, by the same max security we saw before, if y is not y prime, this take separate probability is most 1 over p, and that should be fine. We have like, unit bound 2 over p error probability. So there's a final problem. What about these EIs? They don't just come falling from the sky, do they? They have to be random for this thing to work, and they have to be chosen at this point, right? Because, I mean, maybe I should have said that. So of course, this only works if all the x's and x primes are fixed before we choose these, otherwise you can cheat, of course. So it has to be chosen on the fly just now. Now, choosing lots of random things doesn't seem like a good idea, right? Because, of course, the stupid solution is to have the pre-processing supply these double check things before, but this uses way too many of these guys. It's too expensive. It turns out I can choose just one random value, and that will suffice. Because when the time comes, I will open this one value, which is guaranteed to be random and couldn't be predicted by anyone. Now I define the EI to be u to the I mod p. That's going to be pretty cheap, right? Because I just need to do one multiplication to get the next EI. Yeah? This will work almost as well as choosing all the EIs at random. And why? Well, recall that we have y is this value e0 times x0 plus and so on, and y prime is the same thing with the primes. So if it is the case that you manage to have, that the adversary managed to have y be y prime, then you can write up this equation at the bottom there, so y minus y prime is 0, and that's actually x0 minus x0 prime times u to the 0, etc., etc. So if there's some difference which is not 0, what this equation is saying is that u must be a root in this non-zero polynomial which has degree at most t. And we know, of course, how many roots there can be, so therefore the error probability is now, okay, not 1 over p, but t over p. which is probably fine for most cases because, like, I mean, the sort of rough idea is P is exponentially large and T is only polynomial, so that should be fine. Of course, I mean, for concrete numbers, you could say, well, maybe I make somewhat smaller batches, so T will not be, that large. So for concrete values, I can kind of tune this. There's some trade-offs into, how big packages you check. I think the current implementation of speed checks things in batches of 10,000 values or something like that. Okay, so this is where we are. So how do we prove security? Well, this is where I have to talk a little bit about UC security. So what you need here is a simulator. And this guy will talk, you can see the diagram down there. It's going to talk on one side to this thing we call the ideal functionality. That's the trusted part that's Snoopy from before, that implements, in this case, the computation of the function reliably. On the other side, the simulator is talking to the environment. So in UC terminology, the environment is this guy who, at least in my version of the framework, plays a dual role. One, he represents the entity that attacks the protocol. So he corrupts players and plays the protocol with the honest players. On the other hand, he also chooses the inputs for the honest players and gets the output back. Right? And then the idea is that if you look at what goes on here, so this is the ideal process. And now if you replace the simulated functionality by the real protocol, then the environment should not see any difference. That's the definition of security. It's not really all that different from the definition that Abi showed you yesterday, because he was saying, well, for all inputs, then it must be the case that if you look at the inputs and the protocol transcript, that must be distinguishable from then the real case of that must be distinguishable from the simulated case. So the difference here is that instead of just quantifying over all inputs, we're saying there's a machine that chooses the inputs and gets the outputs back. And this is something you have to do to be able to get this composition property. So the nice thing about this is if you prove this kind of security, then you know the protocol will stay secure even though, no matter what it's composed with. And whatever is external to the protocol is represented by the environment. Okay. So that's the goal. And sometimes people get confused about this fact that, I mean, it sounds weird that there's an entity that sees the protocol transcript, but also knows the inputs and outputs of everyone. This is weird, right? But we're really, as we would say in Denmark, we're wearing both belts and suspenders at the same time. We want to be really secure because we want to say you cannot distinguish the protocol transcript from the simulated thing, even if you also know the inputs and outputs. It's even better, actually. Okay, so our functionality here that we want to implement is one that gets inputs from the players. It computes the side function, sends output to the corrupted players, the outputs for the corrupted players to the adversary. Then you ask the adversary, is it okay to proceed, or do you want to abort? If the adversary says abort, you don't do anything further. If he says okay, then you send the output to the honest players. It's something we have to have because we have dishonest majority, so anything could abort. There's no way around this, so we have to allow the adversary. In this case, it would actually be a simulator to abort, if need be. Okay, so let's see what we have. So here's the environment, the functionality, the function, and here's the simulator. Now we have to fill out this box with sensible stuff. So let's see what the dialog looks like. So first, the environment sends input for the honest players to the functionality. Then he expects to see the protocol go on, right? So what the protocol does first is this pre-processing data that comes for the corrupt players. Now, remember, the environment plays for the corrupt players. So the first thing he expects to see will be pre-processing data that's given to the corrupt players. Okay? Good. So then there's a simulated protocol going on that somehow the simulator has to create. And somehow, presumably during the course of this event, the simulator figures out which input are the corrupted players running with. And he's going to give that to the functionality. Now the functionality can compute the output, so he gives that to the simulator, to the ideal model adversary, if you will. And now the simulator figures out, do I want to abort or not? If the functionality did not get abort, it will send the output for the honest players to the environment. So that's what is going on. Okay, so how do we make the simulator make this happen? So here's a question first of all. So how do we generate those pre-processing data for the corrupt players? Actually, not so hard. Anybody has an idea? Sorry? Simulator does it. Yeah, sure. I mean, this is actually not very hard, right? Because I mean, the whole point is the pre-processing doesn't need to know the inputs at all. So of course you can make pre-processing data. Just go and do it. So there's a pre-processing functionality that specifies how you do this. So you just run this thing.
I could think of it as a UC setup.
Sure. So the idea is that in more formal terms, the environment expects to run in a world where the pre-processing functionality is available. So therefore, of course, he must see the same interface there. And we have a very easy time doing this because the pre-processing functionality does not know any of the inputs. So we can just make an instance of this guy and just run this thing. That's actually very easy. Okay, so now there's the protocol itself. Well, so here, let's say Charlie was corrupted and Lucy is honest. It's in 2 players. So how do we, so the environment plays for corrupted Charlie here. What about Lucy? So how do we simulate her? Any ideas? If you've seen proofs like this before, it's not so hard, but maybe if you haven't, it's not so intuitive. Well, the idea is we just run Lucy with dummy inputs. I mean, Lucy is a machine, right? So we just run her. There's of course this caveat that in the real protocol, Lucy would be running with her honest inputs, which we do not know. But we say, who cares? We just give her dummy inputs, all zeros or whatever. Why would this work? Well, because the simulated protocol the protocol is supposed to be information theoretically secure. So therefore, the transcript should not reveal anything about which inputs you have. So why shouldn't this work? I mean, seems good enough. All right. There are some caveats. So let me just go and sort of give it a little bit more sensible sketch here. So this just says what we just said before. Also, the protocol assumes functionality for pre-processing. So you need to simulate this. You will start your own copy, as simulated, you'll start your own copy of each honest players with default inputs, say 0, and then we can, of course, go through the protocol by just letting these guys play with the adversary, who plays for the corrupted players. There are some issues, though. In the input stage, let's say we have a corrupt player P. He sends a value Z. The protocol says that that's supposed to be X minus R, for an R that he got from the pre-processing. Remember, we did the pre-processing ourselves, right? So we know R. Therefore, we will say, if he says C, what the input he must mean is C plus R, right? That's the only sensible conclusion, right? So we'll give this as input for P to the functionality. And again, Claudia mentioned this as well yesterday. Maybe this will not be the original input that this player got, but who cares? Because this is active security. You can just get any input. You can claim an input that you want. Okay, detection phase, easy just for the protocol. Output phase, so here's a little caveat. So we've been running a simulated protocol with wrong inputs for the honest players. So probably the output representations we have now will not contain the right output. Now at this point, the functionality tells us what the output should be. Okay, so we have a box that contains y prime, and now we know the output should have been y. What do? Well, we have one honest player, at least that we control, this dummy thing, right? So we'll just adjust his or her share into something else so that the box now contains y instead of the incorrect y prime. We also adjust the max share so everything is fine. We can do this. Why? Because we did the pre-processing ourselves. So we know the global MAC key. So we can cheat in this way. Okay, and then just do the normal opening. Okay? And the final thing is that if in the simulated protocol all the checks are okay, then we say, okay, you can release the output to the functionality, otherwise we abort. Because that's also what the real protocol would do. Okay, so that's the final description. Now, here's what we have. Yes?
So is there anything specific you see security in
So the question is there anything specific to UC security in the proof? For this proof, I think not actually. There is a specific thing which I didn't mention, that one thing that's special about a UC simulator is that you cannot rewind, because that's part of the rules, because the composition theorem only holds if you do not rewind in the simulation. This is quite trivially not the case here. So, but you would have problems if you had to. Okay, so what does this thing do with the description of this game? Well, it's going to generate a view for the environment, which is a completely, perfectly, correctly sampled protocol transcript where the correct output is computed. This must be good. We're done, right? Or are we? I guess you can figure out from the way I'm asking the question that we're not quite done with the argument. I mean, the simulator is fine, but the argument is not done. So, I mean, it seems very nice, doesn't it? This is, but there's one thing we didn't say yet. Sorry? Correctness of the output, everybody says that's a good explanation. So the thing is, this of course, by definition, always gives you a protocol transcript where the output is correct because we get it from the ideal functionality. But the question you should ask is, maybe the real protocol doesn't compute correct output. Well, if it did that with noticeable probability, then the environment will look at this and say, if the output is not correct according to the inputs I know, that must be a real protocol, it's not simulation. So of course we have, I mean, come on, of course we have to use somewhere in the proof that the protocol computes correct output, right? So the thing is, incorrect output almost never happens exactly because of the max. This is what we spent time on arguing during the day. So what happens is we get statistical security, because what you can show is that the simulator is perfect unless a certain event happens, and this event happens only with very small probability. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Good. So I have some. So remember, my goal is to get a protocol where the number of field operations I do is linear in the size of the circuit for each player, and the overhead will only be additive otherwise. This doesn't. So the good news is, these representations we have, each player only stores a constant number of field elements, and the required number of representations is linear in the circuit size. And furthermore, a number of these expensive guys we don't like, they are independent of the circuit size. So far, that's very nice. Not so good news. When we open, the way I specified it kind of is, each of the n players will send a share to all of the other players, so that's n squared messages. This we don't like so much. That's easy to fix, fortunately, because we'll just say, let's just send all players, we send share to a single player P. This guy's going to add them up and broadcast the result to everybody. Now I only have all the n messages in addition. Of course, this guy might be corrupt, he might lie about the result, but it doesn't matter because this is equivalent to a corrupt player lying about his share in the first place. It allows the adversary to add in some error. Well, he could do this anyway, so it doesn't make any difference for security. Well, isn't broadcast, but some of you may have heard that broadcast is really expensive and you shouldn't do too much of this. And now I'm saying I'm doing this all over the place. And I think that at least for the proof, it's very useful if this is broadcast, because it means that the honest players will agree on which value we open. That's something that we need. Well, the observation is we don't really need proper broadcast. The thing is that the overall protocol cannot guarantee we terminate anyway, so the broadcast doesn't have to do that either. So it's a discount solution for broadcast. I don't think it's something we invented, but so say this player wants to broadcast the value x. What you do is you send x to all the players. All players send what they received to all players, and now each player compares every value he's seen, and you abort if there's any mismatch whatsoever. Now it's very easy to see that if two honest players receive different values in the first step, then there's of course at least one honest player that will abort. Right? Yeah, I mean, so the sender is corrupt. He sends two different things to two honest players. Now you exchange values. So these two guys will hear different things and they will abort. And all on this place will see this in the next round and they will abort too. So, yeah. Of course, this also sends in square field elements, but it can be much better if we amortize this a bit. So, let's say I want to broadcast a whole bunch of values. And if you think about the protocol, you can easily get that situation where it's enough to just broadcast a batch of things. So I send my stuff to all the players, and now all the players just send a hash of what they receive to all the players. This should be as good. I mean, we just want to check if we agree, right? So you just send a hash of what we got. And now you compare all the hashes, and you abort if there's any mismatch. You can, of course, just use a regular hash function for this if you like that assumption. You can also do it from a universal hashing, which gives you, information generating security. In any case, we only send order n field elements to broadcast one element. So this makes it be complexity-wise the same thing. It's just everybody's. I just send my values to everyone. Okay? So it should be fun. Yes.
Stupid question. I don't know much about broadcast, but would pre-processing help in any way?
Okay, so the question is, will pre-processing help? It does. There's a whole bunch of results about this sort of thing. That if you get some correlative randomness in the beginning, you can broadcast. Not this discount, but real broadcast you can do, even if the usual assumptions of broadcast are not satisfied. The classic result says, if in most of the third place is corrupt, then in this model you can broadcast, otherwise you can't. But the point is, we didn't worry too much about this because we really need proper broadcast anyway. So, yes. So, summing up, so if you implement all these tricks here, what you end up with is the following. So you can compute an arithmetic circuit, n players size S of circuit, securely without probability 1 divided by p, field size, and each player has to store order S plus n squared field elements, and needs to do order S plus n squared local field operations. So it means you for a large circuit at least, it means each player, as a player, I basically spend similar work as I would need to compute the circuit in the clear, which seems nice. Well, yeah. So it's that is true. I should, if I use the exact batch checking I was talking about before, it should be TOP. That is true. Or yeah, that'll work. Yes. So implementation issues. The last implementation I know of, which might not be the most recent one though, is if you have 3 players on the LAN, let's say, 64-bit prime. In an amortized sense, you can do one secure multiplication in amortized time, something like 0.003 milliseconds. So that corresponds to, I don't know, equivalent in Boolean gates, I don't know, maybe a few million gates, I guess, or something like that. That's pretty good. But I don't think there was some implementation effort spent when the Speeds 2 paper came out, but I think there hasn't been that much work on the low-level speeds after that, so I suspect you will probably do better. Okay, so yes?
So, coming back to one question on the broadcast. So, with the echo broadcast, you can't know who caused the cheating. Which party is the one who made the fair. But in this protocol, if I'm understanding correctly, even if I use proper broadcast, you wouldn't be able to detect who messed up the max anyway, right?
Yes. So first question is does it make a difference if you use a broadcast where you can tell who is being bad? So Speeds, as I presented here, does not detect who cheated. It just detects that someone cheated. And if you wanted to do this, I think the online phase will not necessarily help you. If you want to really find out, you have to trace everything and go back to the pre-processing phase and check if everything there instead. And I believe, although I don't have a proof, that this is the price you have to pay for not having max that each player can individually check. It's a global check, right? Intuition. Okay, so is this the best we can do? I think, yeah, I have time for that. Okay, so there's a very nice paper by 2 guys called Winkler and Wulschläger in Crypto 10. And what they show is they look at 2-party protocols and the pre-processing model. And they show some lower bounds on if you want to compute a certain function f securely with statistical security in the preprocessing model, how much data do you need to get? And they have a bound that depends on certain combinatorial properties of the function. It works for OT, for instance. Okay, so now I want to set up a situation, a multi-party situation that I can reduce to the two-party case. So let's say we take a certain player, pi, he gets input bit y, just a bit. All the other players have strings x and x prime of length, let's say s field elements. Okay? I don't really care who holds those, but let's say I distribute them evenly among these guys. And the function is that player pi is supposed to learn y times x plus 1 minus I times x prime. So in other words, this is an OT, right? You get either x or you get x prime, depending on what your bit is. Now, obviously, if I want to compute this thing by an arithmetic circuit, of course, I need order cascades. It's kind of trivial. I just need to multiply everything by y and by y prime, and I add. So that's clear. And now, suppose I have any multi-party protocol in the preprocessing model, which is such that each player needs to store at most little o of x frequently, so significantly less. So then that protocol can be turned into a two-party protocol by simply saying I'm going to let Alice emulate the player pi. I'm going to let Bob emulate all the other players. Okay, that's a two-party protocol in the preprocessing model. But if you have this little storage, it turns out you get a result that contradicts the different voice layer. So that means that if I have a protocol in the preprocessing model that allows you to compute any circuit of size S, it must be that each player stores omega S field elements. There's just no way around this. Okay? So, you can also show that this is a bit more complicated. But each player PI will actually have to read all his preprocessed data. Right? I mean, it's not entirely clear because even I have all this stuff, right? Then maybe I wouldn't have to read it all to do a certain computation, at least not in all cases, perhaps. But there is, what you can do is you can construct a circuit which is mean enough that it actually forces PI to read all this data. So that also gives a low bound on the work he has to do. Okay? So roughly, as field operations also must be done, which also matches pretty much what we have in the protocol. Except not really, because the thing is, it shows that for a given circuit, it might be the case that this guy has to work really hard. It doesn't prove that everybody has to work simultaneously this hard. And that's an open problem. Can we show this? My conjecture is yes, this must be the case. Intuition is that, well, I could be the only honest guy in the world, right? Everybody else is doing nothing useful, no useful work. So it seems that I have to compute the function myself because the protocol computes the function somehow. So it seems I have to do the work. This is not entirely true because you're allowed a board, right? So you have to think more carefully. It could be that somehow we could divide the work between us, and then you do some work, I do some work, and we prove to each other that we did the right thing, and then we collect results and somehow compute the function easily. If this were computational secure protocol, something like this might very well work, because there are proofs that I did stuff correctly that are very, very succinct and easy to see, but they all use computational assumptions. So if I have to do information theoretic security, it doesn't seem you can do this. There are even results saying that the very short proofs that are unconditionally secure actually don't exist. This doesn't prove my conjecture, of course, but maybe you could show that if you had a protocol that contradicts my claim, that would imply a proof that would be too short to exist or something like this. So my conjecture is I think everybody has to work this hard. Of course, communication complexity, who knows? I mean, that's a much harder question, I think. I do have something to say about this, but that comes later. Okay, so yeah, I'm a little bit early. Okay, maybe I should start a little bit on the pre. This is the next section, right? So it's about how do we do the pre-processing. I think maybe I will present you the sort of rough setup of this, and then let this brew in your mind, and then we'll do the actual pre-processing protocol after the break. The idea is that we will use a somewhat homomorphic encryption scheme. that will allow many values to be multiplied in parallel inside one ciphertext. So the actual thing that we have in the paper is something based on the so-called ring LVE assumption. This is a variant of something by Bar-Ilan with Nigel Smart and other people's so-called SIMD extension on top. This same instruction, multiple data. This is what SIMD means. So concretely what it means is the following. So it's a secure public key scheme, a CPA secure public key scheme, where plain text will be vectors, M1 to MS, say, or field elements. And the idea is that you can encrypt such a vector, and if you add ciphertext, you get an encryption of the sum of the vectors, sum as vectors, component-wise sum. Likewise, if you multiply ciphertexts, you get an encryption of the product, component-wise product, that is. And this operations, addition, multiplication takes place in some appropriate ring that depends on how you define the crypto system. So what you are guaranteed is if you decrypt a certain ciphertext, this will give you the correct result if the ciphertext was not too dirty. Let's put it that way. So the idea is that in order to make this sort of encryption scheme be secure, when you encrypt, you add in some noise that somehow, the randomness that helps you hide the message. And the problem with having this be homomorphic now is every time you add, particularly when you multiply, the size of this noise contribution gets bigger and bigger, and it grows much faster when you multiply. So a somewhat homomorphic encryption scheme has this limitation that you can't do more than a certain number of operations, because if you do too much, then you cannot decrypt correctly. So in our case, what not too dirty means is we need to be able to do a lot of additions and then one multiplication. And after that, we still need to be able to decrypt correctly. So anyway, just for intuition, so what you get with this encryption scheme is like you get a vectorized processor, right? You have a whole bunch of things sitting in your register, and you can add everything in your register with another register, you can multiply everything. So it's perfect for doing, let's say, small degree parallel operations, right? This is just what we need, right? Because what do we need? We need multiplication tables. Well, max, okay, but still, I mean, so we need to have random values, multiply them, lots of them in parallel, and there you go. So it's kind of intuitively clear that this might fit very well. I should add perhaps that I mean, I made kind of a general statement about this. So small degree functions, lots of them in parallel, are fine. So if you think about this, that's also what the algorithm is, isn't it? So that's an observation that I think Yehuda and others have taken, and that there's a new paper on this where instead they do this sort of thing with speeds on top to compute a multiparty gobble circuit, the BMR gobble circuit, which you can then use in the online phase. So this would give you constant round in the online phase with some expense in terms of now we have to do cryptography and not just information theoretic operations in the online phase. But still, it's a nice manifestation of this idea also, I think. Okay, what is coming now? Decryption. That I think I'd rather wait with, I think. So I think we should take a break now, even if it's a little early, and come back. So you want to come back earlier now than the plan says, or? Oui. Yes. Yeah. Okay, half an hour. Okay, good. See you later.